Hi everyone, Curtis Judd here again. We're going to do a follow on to our really inexpensive video lighting segment that we did last time. And this time we're going to do a little bit more focus on not so much the lights, which we've talked about last time, and you should go back and check it out if you haven't yet. But this time, what to do once you've downloaded the files to your computer, because there are some things you want to do probably in your editor to get that nice polished finished look. So just a quick review on the lights. If you didn't see last episode, I would encourage you to go see that. If you don't have time, let me just quickly explain what we've got going here. We've got our two lights here. I'm actually kind of switched it up a little bit from last time. I have a key light here and a light that's actually bouncing in an umbrella there to give a little bit, just a tiny bit more contrast over on this side of my face. Again, these are both those clamp lights that you purchase from your hardware store, like the Home Depot, Lowe's, whatever else you have in your area. I would get the 10-inch dish size. In each of those, I'm running a compact fluorescent bulb, a relatively large one. Like these are, when you first see them, you'll kind of laugh. They're so huge. They are 68 watt, which is the equivalent of a 300 watt incandescent bulb. Those are big bulbs. So you get a lot of power, and that really makes things a lot easier to light, and you won't have as many struggles getting the final image that you want. Also, I've got the hair light that's up on a boom here, and that can be a much lower wattage bulb. We're still using the same clamp light, so I just bought 3 of those to get this kind of 3 light setup going. That one is a much lower wattage. Again, it's about 20 watts, and you want to make sure that the color temperature on all 3 of the bulbs are the same, so that you don't have to kind of struggle and you get freaky color casts and stuff like that. So you don't have to struggle with that. Backdrop again is just a black cloth backdrop in this case. I try to get your subject away from that as much as you can. In this case, I'm about 6 feet from that. And what that helps with is it prevents issues with shadows back there. And that is really helpful. You don't want to have to struggle with shadows, and they're really distracting. So that just keeps the lights and your subject away from that a little bit, and then you don't have as many of those issues. Also, one thing you may need to play with, and this came up in some of the comments last time, is exposure compensation or going into manual exposure mode. So if you're kind of not feeling totally comfortable with your camera, you're kind of still learning, you may want to just use exposure compensation. And what that does is it tells the camera to not do something that you don't want it to do. Specifically, when you have a low-key image like this where most of the frame is black and just your subject is lit, you're going to want to prevent the camera from trying to make an overall gray image out of that. Because what will happen a lot of times is it will try to compensate, and it will get you a really hot image that doesn't look good. So the face and your subject will kind of be burned out. They'll have too much light on them, and the background will turn gray instead of black. So that's just because your camera is trying to do the best it can at averaging everything together. So what you want to tell it to do is actually underexpose, and you're just sort of giving it a little guidance and telling it, hey, that background that you're trying to make gray, we actually want that to be black. So you may want to dial your exposure compensation down, maybe a stop, maybe 2 stops. You just have to kind of experiment with your camera. One thing you can also try if you're feeling a little bit more comfortable is going to manual exposure mode if your camera supports that. And in that case, what you'll be controlling then is the aperture and the ISO settings. What I would recommend is kind of try and stay a little bit lower in the ISO range. So in this case, I think I'm shooting, let's double check. Yes, at ISO 320. I probably would try and stay at 400 or under if you can. Depending on how much light you have, that may not be possible, but probably somewhere in the 320 to 400 range. And then as far as aperture is concerned, you'll want to be in the 3.2 to 3.5 range at least. You can go higher than that if you want to, but you'll have to have stronger lights to be able to manage that. So be somewhere in that 3.2, 3.5 range, and that'll get you pretty close to where you want to be. Now, that's a quick review of the lights. Let's talk about what happens once you download the files from your camera to your computer and put it in your editing program. All right, we've brought our footage from the camera over into Adobe Premiere Pro, and I'm going to use this as just an illustration. I'll also use After Effects, also an Adobe application, to illustrate some of the more common tools that are available out there to get the final look that we're going for. Obviously, you may be using a different tool. That's perfectly fine. This is not really geared towards Adobe products necessarily, but just to show you the common tools that are available out there. There are obviously hundreds, even thousands perhaps, of different applications available, and so we can't cover all of them, but let me just show you the more common tools. So first of all, you'll notice here that our footage looks a little bit muddy, and it doesn't have a lot of contrast, and honestly, the black looks a little bit more grayish than black. So to give you a little bit of background and to kind of take a step back, that was actually done purposely. In my camera, I have used a specific picture style that gives me a relatively low contrast image, and it does not apply a lot of sharpening. And the reason for that is that I want to be able to put those two steps off until later, because really what you want to do is be able to dial in your exposure and your contrast levels and your colors, and then apply the sharpening after that. Also, by reducing your contrast, you're able to gain to capture on your camera a wider dynamic range. So we really want to start there, and then in post processing apply our contrast and our sharpening and any kind of color correction, obviously, before the sharpening step. So that's where we're at here. So what I've got here is actually a free tool called Colorista Free, and you can download that online. Just do a search for Colorista Free, and you'll definitely find it. It plugs into a variety of different applications, so you can use all those. And the first thing we want to do is dial down our blacks and get that black background about where we want it. So I just grab this here, and you can see we've got our black just about where we want. The problem is when I grab that, you'll notice that it reduced the exposure on the subject here. And we definitely don't want that. So we're going to take our midtones. And again, let me just kind of explain. This is a three-way color corrector. On the left here, I've got my shadows, or the darks. In the middle, I have the midtones, and on the right, I have the highlights. So I've grabbed the luminance control for the shadows and drop those down. So I definitely wanted to kind of crush just the background, not everything else. Now what I can do is take my midtones and bring those back up so that I get a nice good exposure on the subject itself. And I can do the same kind of tweak things here with the highlights as well. So that's good. That's about where I want to be. Pretty happy with that overall look. The problem I'm seeing here, though, is there is still a little bit of a green color cast. Now, we shot again with compact fluorescent bulbs, and fluorescent bulbs almost always have a green cast to them, even when they show different color temperatures, when they're rated for different color temperatures on the packaging, they still tend to have a little bit of a green cast to them. So, and even though I set my camera's color balance to fluorescent, we still see a little bit of that green. So what I can do here in this three-way color corrector is come into the color wheels and apply some color adjustment to kind of remove that green cast. And I don't know a lot about color theory, but one thing I do know, and that you may find helpful as well, is that when you want to reduce one color, you probably want to increase the color on the opposite side of the color wheel to apply that change. So for example, here in the midtones, I'm going to click opposite the green because again, we have a little bit of a green cast. So I'm going to apply just a little bit of green, or opposite of green there, which is in the kind of red and magenta area. And the same with the highlights. I'll do that. Don't want to go too crazy, but I do want to affect a change there. Okay, there. Now we're starting to see much more natural color in the skin tones and in the hair. There's still a little bit of green up there, and we can kind of fine tune that here. And actually the shadows, I'm going to bring that back because I don't really think that we're affecting our shadows too much. That's good. That's a pretty good look there. We'll just stick with that for now. So that's one way I can get to my final look, and I'm pretty happy with that. After this, I would apply some sharpening if I felt like it wasn't sharp enough, and then go ahead and export it from there or render it from there. So that's one way you can do it with the three-way color corrector. And again, Colorista Free is a free application you can use. There are a variety of others. Let's move over to After Effects, and I can show you some of the things we have going there. Again, brought the footage in here, and a couple of different tools that you may have heard of before. There's levels, which I think is probably pretty effective for this particular case, and there's also curves, which curves are really nice, but I don't know that curves are really the right tool for this, but they could work in a pinch, and I'll show you both of those. So first of all, the levels control. So what we're showing here is a histogram, and we're showing the shadows through the highlights are represented here. So shadows on the left, highlights on the right. And what I've got are a couple of sliders at the bottom here that can tell the editor here the type of, where I want the darks to start and where I want the highlights to start. And so all I really need to do is drag this. This is going to take care of my shadows here for me. So get the black background that we're looking for by dragging that up until we start to see some information here. This is just captured pixels, if you will. And so I drag that up to about here, and you can see we've got a really nice black background here. So that's really the look we're going for. Then as far as my highlights are concerned, I drag that until I get to the information on this end, and you can see that brought our highlights up and our midtones up a little bit. So what I can do to kind of fine tune things at this point is just grab this middle slider and move it to exactly where I want it. And again, I'm looking for a pretty low key tone, or pretty low key kind of look. And so somewhere right in about there is going to work well for us. All right, so that's how you could use levels to accomplish some of the same things. That's just going to take care of the luminance for you. It's not going to take care of the color. You'll have to do the color separate from that. But let's reset that so I can show you this curves control. Curves can be a little bit mind-bending at first. Once you get the hang of them, though, they're really easy and really powerful. What I can do with this is, this again represents the darks are going to be represented down on this part of the line, and the highlights are going to be up here. So if I want to darken my darks, I'm going to grab this and kind of create a point there and drag it down. You can see that's definitely bringing the blacks down into the area I want. And then I want to recover my highlights. So I'll grab here and just kind of tweak that up this way. Now, again, this is not really, I don't think, the right tool for the job. This is more, curves is really more designed for kind of the final, you know, getting your final contrast set. But you can see we get pretty close there as well. We're definitely going to need some color correction here. We're seeing a little bit of a green cast on the skin tones there. But that's, again, another thing that you can do to kind of get in the same ballpark if that's one of the tools, if that's the only tool available to you. I would actually normally, again, recommend keeping that as a last resort. Now, as far as color, one of the things that I use a lot for doing color correction and color grading is this plugin called Color Finesse by Synthetic Aperture. And this came with Adobe After Effects, but you can also buy it independent of that, obviously, and it plugs into a variety of different editors. But this gives you a whole lot of control. So within this, you get not only your levels control, and this looks very familiar here. Again, here are those little sliders underneath that you would use to kind of dial in that your blacks and your highlights. This looks very familiar, as we just covered that. But then from there, you can also do a lot of really advanced color correcting types of things. So if I go in here into the RGB, and I bring up a variety of different scopes that I can use to really kind of dial things in. And here in this particular case, I might want to work with my green gain and just bump that down a little bit to get the more natural skin tones. So anyway, that's another tool that you can use. Again, that one's a little bit more advanced and not necessarily something you would have available in a different editor, but that is another option out there. So that kind of covers the range of different tools that you'll typically see within your editing applications, and kind of the process for getting this final look that we were aiming for. Hope that was helpful, and thanks again for tuning in.